Good morning, everybody. How are we all this morning? Very lovely to see you. My name is Ali Board, and this is Technique Tuesday, which goes out on the Learning to Paint with Ali Board Facebook community page. It goes out on YouTube, and it also goes out via my website too. So no matter how you are watching this morning, you are all very welcome. Now, if you are watching on Facebook, you may have noticed that last week I made a little bit of a confession that this is pre-recorded. I am sorry for that, but hopefully, fingers crossed, I am at the moment off to my friend in London's house, and we're going to go on a few adventures together. We haven't been able to do our music listening adventures for a long time. So fingers crossed, legs crossed, and everything crossed that whilst you are watching this, I am off enjoying myself with all of my music loving friends. Now, last week, you may have seen that I got towards the beginning of completing my painting, if that doesn't sound too peculiar. Completing a painting of the level of illustration that bee project has required is going to take me a very long time. We'd already done 10 parts of Technique Tuesday with that bee project, so I'm actually going to finish that bee project when I have time behind the scenes. But it did make me think about finishing projects, about that question about when is a painting finished, how do you finish it, what are those little finishing touches that you might look for. So I thought rather than telling you what to do, because that's not what Technique Tuesday is about. Technique Tuesday is about helping you to become a self-sufficient artist. And so I thought I would take you through a couple of paintings that I have been working on recently so that you can see some of the things that I might be thinking about, some of the places that my head is. And sometimes you don't always see an artist get right to the nitty-gritty. So I hope today will be helpful to you. As always, keep your comments coming into the chat. Just because I'm not here live today doesn't mean that you can't reach out to each other across the miles. Make sure that everyone is okay. Say hello to your virtual friends and keep in touch with each other. So let's take you to that overhead camera so you can see the two paintings that I'm going to be talking about today. And it's these two. So I had a couple of demonstrations that I did recently where one of them was virtual and one of them was in person, both concerning birds, and both, as what happens with demonstrations, they don't always get to being completely completed. So this was the first one. This was my peacock project. Let's just find the photograph of that for you. This was from someone else's photograph. This was not from mine. And we were taking the class through how to get towards this beautiful kind of peacock finish in terms of texture, all of those kind of things. But I didn't quite get to the point of finishing him off. So I've got that to think about. And then you've got this one, which is one of my beloved chickens, Dora. This is a photograph that obviously I took. And again, I got through the interesting bit. I shared how to draw it out. I shared how I do my backgrounds and added some texture to her feathers, all of those kind of things. But I didn't quite get to the end of completing her. There are a few tweaks that need to be made. And so I'm actually going to use the same product or a couple of similar products on both of these projects. Something that I do on a very regular basis just to kind of tweak them together. I'll start off with the peacock because that is the one that is most complete. And I'll share with you why that is most complete. And it's because I have already started to do some drawing in with pen. I've gone back in with a waterproof pen and I've gone back in with a couple of paint markers too. But there's a couple of things here and there that I feel could just do with a little bit of tweaking. And also there's one more textural element that I want to put in at the bottom. I'll show you that in just a second. Now, one of the things that I'm not very happy with on my peacock is that this part of the face isn't as dark as I would like it to be. So I'm going to go back in with a paint marker for that. And I've got one just here. So this is an acrylic paint marker. I've demonstrated various kinds of these before. I tend to use Posca, which is a brand that I've used previously. I'm currently in the process of kind of experimenting with 2 or 3 different kinds of paint marker maybe that's something for a future Technique Tuesday discussion. If it is and you'd like to see that, pop it into the comments or pop me an email. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So I'm going to get this paint marker started, so I need to give it a really good shake. Let's turn my picture over. Here you go. You can see lots of experiments that have gone on the back. And let's get that lid off. And then we'll see if it's flowing okay. Yeah, it's not too bad. It's a little bit on the dry side. So let's give it a little bit of an extra pump to get that colour flowing. So it is a retractable nib. So as I push up and down, that nib is bouncing on the surface. That's a little bit better. So if we take it back over and I have my photograph in shot as well, I'm going to do some little extra shading. One of the things that I wasn't terribly happy about was sort of how ordered and organised this all looked. And the peacock isn't that organised. So I'm going to mess around with some of the shapes a little bit more and get some of those darks in too. Now, one of the things that paint markers will do for you, of course, is that while they're wet, you can smudge them. So I've got a small brush here with just a little bit of water on it. And while that ink paint is still wet in the pen, I can smudge it around with my brush. I'm thinking maybe I made that a little bit too pointy, but never mind. So we can make that face a little bit darker. And I think I have brought this white too far down as well. So I can go back in. Let's remove that. And we need to put a little bit of extra shadow in underneath to give some definition to the head. So that's another thing I'm going to do, using my brush to smudge those elements around. Let's pull it down into the neck a little bit more. And all of a sudden, it starts to look a little bit more finished. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lift some of that dark colour from over here and transplant it over onto the eye, because I've left a little bit too much white highlight. In fact, let's zoom in for you so you can see exactly what it is that I'm talking about in terms of adding that dark there. Hopefully you can see that's come together with much more kind of clarity. Now, another thing that I wasn't terribly happy with was the shape that the top of the beak made. I don't mind this side of it so much, but over here I wasn't that enamoured with the shape that I had gone to. So I've added a little bit of dark in there too with my brush, which I can smudge around. And again, while this is still wet, I can pick up some of that colour and I can smudge it into that beak section. So that's now looking a lot better. You can probably see some of the extra pen marks that I did previously, but it's that little bit of finishing off, that kind of textural definition, dark shadow, which means that I like the head of the peacock a lot more now. One thing I want to do down at the bottom is to add some texture into it. So I'm going to do a slightly different technique for you in finishing off the texture. I'm going to use these two products. I'm going to use some Sequin Waist, which is this stuff. So this is the plastic that is left behind when sequins that are meant for costumes and for clothing are punched out of it. It's easy to find. You can find it in fabric stores. You can find it, I'm pretty sure Amazon have it, those kind of things. So that is something that you can purchase. It's all rolled up, which is going to prove to be a bit tricky, but we'll tackle that in a second. And the other thing that I have got here is a natural sponge. Now, what I'm going to use this for is I'm going to do a lifting out technique. So I'm going to wet this, I'm going to push it through that sequin waist, and I'm going to pull some of the colour away. So the first thing I need to do is I need to dunk that sponge into my water pot, and I need to squeeze it out. But for this technique, you want to do a little added extra. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to put my sponge into my bit of kitchen roll, squeeze it really, 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 really tight, and that takes off the majority of the moisture, but it's still flexible. I need another bit of kitchen roll as well. You can see this isn't the cleanest part in the world. And then what I need is my sequin waist. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my sequin waist down over some of the areas of colour. And then I'm going to use my natural sponge to lightly scrub at some of the surface. Now, depending on what you have down on the surface will depend on how much scrubbing you need to do. But then when I lift it away, can you see you've got that kind of ghost shape in there of that little bit of sequin waist? I'm going to do some more over on the wing. Let's do some over here. I want it to be fairly random. I don't want to make too much of it. And I like, there you go, there's a bit of serendipity for you. I like that it's kind of gone over the wing shape and up into the blue. That's very pleasing. Now down here, I think I'm going to want some more of it. Let's go over here and lift some of this. The sequin waist will shred your sponge a little bit, but that's just one of those things that you need to live with. And then I've got a kind of positive pattern going on there. So all of these things are adding to the texture that I had already laid down. And of course, if you want to learn how to do the rest of this project, there are various tutorials that I run so that you can paint along with me. Now I've just had to re-wet my sponge because I am pushing my limits for how much extra I can take out. So these are the last little elements that I'm putting in down here, where I'm going to give it a good old scrub, and I've got that kind of trailing off now. Then if I zoom out a little bit, just so that we can see if we can get the whole painting in, what I've got now is a painting that I'm much more pleased with. It's got more definition around the face, and we've got that kind of nice extra textural element into the feathers too. So I'm much happier with that. Sometimes I have to come away from a demonstration knowing that I've got those few little last tweaks to do, but in a bit of calm and quiet, I can share them with you and I can get them done at the same time. So let's put the peacock to one side and let's bring the gorgeous Dora into shot. Now she is also almost finished. Almost, but not quite. What she needs is extra definition around the beak area. It's not too bad, but it's not as good as I would like it to be. She needs some extra colour up in her comb and her wattles, and her eyes need a little bit of work. So I'm going to start with those eyes. I'm going to go in with that black acrylic paint marker, because whilst I'd done a pretty passable job of getting that in, it was a little too scrappy. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to make it blacker and darker. Those acrylic markers, they really push the depth of colour much further than I would be able to necessarily achieve with watercolour. So we can get that in. See, that looks better already because our eyes look that little bit more piercing. And I have to say, I do really love this kind of pop-up. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, she does look slightly like a Muppet. She looks like her own hand puppet, really. I like the fact that she looks a bit surprised. Now, one thing that I'm going to do on the beak, which might be a surprise to you, and I use this technique a lot for finishing off pictures, is that I go back in with a pencil. I want there to be some shading and some greys and some shadows going on around. I could do that in watercolour, but I could also do it with a pencil. And actually doing it with a pencil means that if for some reason I make a mistake, or I put it down in a place where I think, I'm not so sure about that, I can, of course, erase it. Now, you might notice that I have changed my grip on my pencil, not holding it like this anymore. I'm holding it much further away. You could also put your hand over the top if you wanted to. I like to use it so actually the end of the pencil is in my hand, and I've got it that way as a bit of a compromise. So I'm using it to create that shape around the beak, to put in that extra little bit of shadow. Now we've got some shadow coming in underneath here too, which again I could put in with watercolour if I wanted to, but I'm actually going to pop in with a little bit of pencil so you can see that coming forward. It also needs a tiny amount of shading just where the edges of her beak come in. So we're going to put that around. I can also take the opportunity with the tip of my pencil to redefine some of those feather shapes that are coming out. Now these might seem like really inconsequential marks that I'm making, but I promise you sometimes they can make all the difference in terms of a painting that looks much more complete. And so I'm adding a few bags under her eyes. Poor old Dora. Doesn't need that. So let's get those in. And again, you can probably see that that's starting to look a lot better already. What I do need to do is to increase some of the brightness, the vibrancy of the red on her wattles. So back to my acrylic markers. I'm not sure that I've used this one before. So let's give it a really, really good shake. There we go. You can hear that ball bearing start. You have to be a little bit physical with them sometimes. So giving that a shake. Is this a pen that I have used before? No, it's not. There you go. You can see I've got a brand new nib. So I do need to pump it up and down onto the piece of paper. Now this is the bit where you have to be quite patient. Don't give it a couple of pumps and think, oh, why isn't it coming through? Got to be a little bit patient, and then eventually you'll see that the ink floods into that nib. I probably need to do a little bit more to get a little bit more flowing. Yeah, there we go. Stick the cap on. And then I can go back to the gorgeous Dora and I can add some of that definition. So we need some extra red up in her comb, and we need to define the top shape so that it looks like it's been folded over. If I want to smudge any of it, of course, I can take my damp brush into it and move it around. Let's add some of those shapes that define the top of the comb, that kind of lovely rounded effect that you get. And then it comes forward. You've got it kind of sweeping forward into the middle of her head. And let's soften that line so that it doesn't look quite so prominent. Coming down here on her face, she's got a little bit of red coming down either side of her beak. Again, that needs softening more because I don't want it to be a hard line. And all of a sudden her beak started coming out. Isn't that marvellous? And then down here into her wattles, those little flaps of skin that hang either side of a hen's beak. Those are the things, incidentally, that give you a bit of an indication. Comb and wattles are the things that give you a bit of an indication of the health of the chicken. And it's something that I keep my eye on every day with my girls to make sure that they're absolutely healthy and happy. So I'm going to add a little bit of red underneath to those bags under the eyes. You can see hopefully now starting to look like it's coming together a bit more. Do I want to do any more to that? I think what I actually need is a little bit of extra orange into her eyes. I was having a good look at her before I did this recording as to what colour her eyes actually are, because she's very similar colour all over, really. You can see in the photograph that she's kind of that really sort of beautifully orange rusty brown. She's actually a hybrid chicken that's called a barred gold, barred as in B-A-R-R-E-D, and a lovely golden colour. But let's get some colour back into the colour around her eyes to make those stand out. And let's put a little bit of extra over on this side too. And then there we go, she's looking a little bit better. The only part of it that I'm not wild about is I really do think that the shadow needs to be deeper underneath it. So I'm going to show you a quick technique of what you can do with these paint markers to use them as a paint instead of as a pen. What I'm going to do is discharge some of the colour into my palette, and I'm going to take my brush and add water to it, instantly making it a paint. Now, of course, one thing that you do have to be mindful of is the fact that this is based on acrylic, so this would dry waterproof, so get it out of your brushes and off your palette as quickly as you can. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to map under here that shadow that is on underneath her beak, because then what I'm hoping is that that beak shape will pop out and she will look like she's being her nosy old self and really peering at you down the lens. And yes, she is. All of a sudden her beak is popping forwards and she's giving that very stern, what on earth are you up to kind of look. I'm also going to add a little bit of shadow to this side of her wattle and a little bit of shadow over here on this side too. And I can feel there's always that age-old discussion, isn't there? How do you know when to stop? How am I supposed to know, Ali, when a painting is complete? And the answer is that a painting is complete when you're painting it for no good reason at all. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you finished it. That might just mean that you need to step away from it. Is exactly as I did when I was doing this demonstration, that I needed to step away from it. I needed it to have a little bit of clarity with it because I needed to see what else the paintings needed. So there we've got Dora and we've got that peacock there. Much more finished. I didn't really do a lot to them. What I did was tweak them so that I was happier with both of them. And now those will go in the portfolio either as demonstration pieces, or if I decide that maybe I quite like Dora, so she might get turned into a greetings card. I haven't quite decided yet. But certainly in the bank of work that I've got, that's going to help enormously in deciding where future projects go, what I do with them, and what else comes after them. So I hope that was interesting to you. I hope that answered some of the questions regarding how do I finish a project, what materials can I use, how do I know when it's finished, all of those types of things. So I hope that was useful to you. I'm going to be back next week for a live Technique Tuesday this time. Haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. What I'm hoping is that the travels that I am currently on are going to fuel a bit of creative imagination for one of those projects. So I'm keeping that under my hat until I see you next time. Thank you very much for watching this pre-recorded session. If you've been on the Facebook chat, thank you for keeping an eye out for everybody and staying in touch. It's really important, probably more important now than it ever has been. So thank you very much for doing that. Take care, all of you, won't you? And I will see you for Technique Tuesday next week live, I promise. Bye, everybody.